show, Anine. Welcome back. Thank you again for joining me. In this session, we'll be talking about identities. So, what does Two-Spirit mean? All Two-Spirit people are Indigenous, so we have to talk a little bit about that. When referring to Indigenous peoples, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. You want to be as specific as possible, and it's always best practice to ask people how they want to be referenced. For example, if you're speaking of people from my nation, you might say Anishinaabe. If you were referring to people from my family's community, you might say Okwaganasan in Anishinaabe. However, if you don't know to which nation they belong, nor which communities they or their families come from, you could simply say Indigenous people or peoples. You would want to avoid outdated terms like Aboriginal or Indian. Of course, Indigenous people may still use these terms. If you are not Indigenous, you should not say them. Some myths and reality. So the first myth here, Two-Spirit individuals are either gay or trans. That may apply to some individuals, however, it is not translatable all across the board. The second myth here, Two-Spirit means you carry a masculine and feminine spirit. Some individuals may identify with that, but that is, again, not something you can say all across the board. And I have heard teachings that this is not necessarily correct as well. However, with anything, any individual may have their own teachings. It does not mean that if their teachings are different than yours, it does not mean that theirs are wrong. It just means that they are different. And let's look at the reality here. Two-Spirit individuals do not fit into colonial boxes or colonial categorization of gender or sexual orientation. Again, this is always an individual thing. You should not make assumptions. Two-Spirit is an umbrella term that was coined in 1990 in Winnipeg to encompass many different identities that have existed since time immemorial. The traditional names of which have, in some cases, been lost to or suppressed by colonization. When someone tells you that they are Two-Spirit, they could be referring to their gender identity or sexual orientation, or both, or neither of those things. It can mean that they are trans, or it can mean that they are a combination of any of these things. Our identities cannot be defined using colonial ideas or the English language, at least not completely. Being Two-Spirit is very individual. Only people Indigenous to Turtle Island should use the term to refer to themselves. It is not a fun or cool way for non-Indigenous people to identify as queer. The term is now 33 years old, but the identities encompassed under that umbrella are as old as time immemorial. When someone tells you that they're Two-Spirit, you must not make any assumptions about what that means to them. Because this is a course for medical professionals, there may be some need for more detail about an individual's identity and their body. If the type of care you're providing for your patient or client doesn't have anything to do with their reproductive health, maybe you don't need more information about their identity or body. Please take care and use your best judgment in which circumstances this is necessary. Please have patience and take the time to get to know and listen to your patient so they can share more as they become more comfortable with you. You must understand that we have had so much history of abuse, negligence, and worse from the medical field that there is often a very significant lack of trust and likelihood of further medical trauma. In fact, there's so much anti-Indigenous racism everywhere, but especially in healthcare, education, policing, childcare, child welfare, rehabilitation, retail, and social situations. Two-spirit also usually has spiritual connotations, as in individuals who identify as two-spirit have spiritual roles and responsibility. Traditionally, two-spirit individuals were held in very high regard. They were often medicine people, warriors, adoptive parents, name givers, matchmakers, aunties, uncles, and much more. Now, some are picking up those traditions again. Not every queer Indigenous person identifies as two-spirit. Some prefer the term indigiqueer, and some have other ways that they describe themselves. Again, this is very individual. We don't say two-spirited, just like we don't say transgendered. And to be clear here, it's that ed suffix that I'm pointing out. For a couple of examples, it would be two-spirit or transgender. Those are not interchangeable, as we've already discussed, though they might both apply to an individual depending on how they identify. Know that there is such a long history of our speech being policed and corrected due to colonization that I advise people never to correct an Indigenous person who calls themselves two-spirited. Just listen and be supportive in what they're sharing with you about their identity. Okay, now the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. When it comes to the queer community, the proper acronym that we're using these days is 2S LGBTQIA+. If you're not familiar, that is definitely a mouthful. When using this acronym repeatedly, it's okay to say all the letters the first time and then say the queer community, or alternate between the two phrases as you're speaking. But let's dig into it and get a little more familiar with the acronym. So 2S has been moved to the front to honor the two-spirit people who have been erased since contact. Pre-contact, we know that we recognized at least 5 different genders, and gender identity is one of the ways in which colonization doesn't only hurt Indigenous people, it is actually hurting everyone. LGBT is perhaps the most commonly understood group of letters in the acronym, being that it has been used since around the 1980s. L is for lesbians, or women who are attracted to women. G is for gay, or men attracted to men. Women who are attracted to women sometimes also use this term. B is for bisexual. Sometimes people think bisexual means attracted to both sexes. This is actually an outdated idea because we know now that sex and gender are not binary, but rather are spectrums. So bisexual means being attracted to one's own gender and another gender, or more than one gender. And T is for transgender, or trans for short, which is when someone identifies as a different gender than the one that their families may have assumed they were from birth onwards. Outdated terms include transvestite and transsexual. Do not use these terms. If a person is trans masculine or a trans man, the correct usage is trans man with a space between those words. This is the same for a person who is trans feminine or a trans woman. Always put the space between trans and woman. This is a subtle difference in usage. There are hate groups out there that are attempting to use hate speech to cause dehumanization of trans individuals. They will often skip putting the space in on purpose. Remembering the space is another way to demonstrate your support and understanding. Q is for queer or questioning. There are times when, for simplicity, people may identify as queer so that they don't have to get into all of the details about who they are with someone. This is also a way in which members of the queer community refer to said community as a whole. It is also a way of reclaiming that word because in the past it was used in a derogatory way to describe us. Questioning may be referring to someone who has only just begun exploring their gender or sexuality. Questioning is also something that could happen at any time in anyone's life, as sexuality is a fluid thing and can change throughout one's life. This is perfectly normal. I stands for intersex. This is a general term that could refer to a person who was born with anatomy that doesn't check off either box in the binary. It could also refer to individuals who have both, or elements, or a mix of both. Intersex identities are varied. Sometimes when these individuals were babies, doctors have encouraged families to have the baby surgically modified to pass as one or the other. Sometimes these surgeries are done later in life. Intersex is much more common than you think. A person might not even know that they're intersex until they start trying to conceive biological children. A refers to asexual or aromantic identities. These are people who don't feel sexual or romantic attraction the way people with allosexual identities do. Allosexual means somebody who experiences sexual attraction. People often think that the A stands for ally. That is incorrect, and this is not about you. Now, the plus, not mentioned yet in the identities I was just talking about, are pansexual, demisexual, and non-binary. Pansexual is when an individual can feel attraction not based on the object of their affection's gender. A good way to understand pansexuality is to remember hearts, not parts. And demisexual is when an individual needs to have an emotional or otherwise some type of connection with their partner to feel attraction. Non-binary individuals are those who do not identify as either a man or a woman. They may also identify as trans or not. There are also people who are agender, and that means without a gender. All of these identities are perfectly valid. They reflect the biological variations that we see all around us in the natural world. Pronouns. Now, pronouns are used very commonly in English. They are a part of speech. Everyone uses pronouns. There are about 120 different pronouns in the English language. We're going to talk about a few of them and pronouns in general. She, her, hers. These are the pronouns most women, both cis and trans, use. He, him, his. These are the pronouns that most men, both cis and trans, use. Cis is Latin. It means on this side. Just like trans is Latin and means on the other side of or beyond. Neither of those words or prefixes are derogatory. They are simply stating the facts. They, them, theirs. These are the pronouns that many trans individuals might prefer during a phase of their lives where they are questioning and still finding themselves. These pronouns might also be used by non-binary individuals who don't identify as men or women. They might also be used by people who identify as agender, meaning they have no gender. Sometimes individuals have more than one set of pronouns that they are okay with people using when referring to them. Some people don't want you to use any pronouns, but rather prefer that you always use their name. How you might see this used is on someone's Zoom name or in their email signature. They are telling you which pronouns to use when speaking of them to avoid any accidental misgendering. To be inclusive and to show others that you are accepting, you should also consider displaying your own pronouns. It makes it easier for everyone when we don't have to guess or assume someone's correct pronouns. If you do accidentally misgender someone, please just correct yourself and move on. That is to say, correct yourself quickly and then move past it as you continue your conversation. Make sure not to repeat this. The best advice I can give someone who is learning how to use pronouns accurately, perhaps for the first time, is to think of the person in terms of their gender and think of their pronouns when you do. It's going to be very hard for you to think of someone and think of think the wrong pronouns and then say the right pronouns. It's just going to be very confusing for you that way. So think of them according to their gender, even if to you they don't present that way. People sometimes do not have the resources necessary to appear a certain way. They also don't owe anyone a certain type of appearance. If you do misgender someone, this is pretty serious. It could be seen as a microaggression if done once, but if done repeatedly, this is just straight up aggression. It's also a microaggression to say preferred pronouns. They're just pronouns. Everyone has pronouns. If you accidentally misgender someone and someone corrects you, as they should, the correct response to being corrected is thank you and not sorry. There's this phenomenon in our society where when someone says they're sorry, the other person says it's okay. And in this case, it's really not okay. Therefore, by saying thank you when you're corrected, you are saving everyone the awkwardness of having to say it's okay or sitting silently in that awkward moment. By saying thank you, you are indicating that you are amenable to respecting everyone and that it was unintentional. If you hear someone misgender someone else, again, you should correct them. This takes the pressure off of the person being misgendered and allows that respectful dialogue to continue. Okay, inclusive language. There are many ways you can begin to use more inclusive language in your everyday speech. This will help you to get used to not saying certain words or phrases that can cause harm. Some examples of these outdated phrases are using unnecessarily gendered language. When you are addressing a group of people who present as women and you call them ladies, women, or gals, etc., there may be individuals in that group who do not identify as women. They may be non-binary or agender. This also goes for groups of people who present as men. Perhaps there are individuals in that group that do not identify as men. When addressing people, it's good practice to keep your language ungendered. For example, hello everyone is a great way to address people without unnecessarily gendered language. When addressing groups of people both in person or virtual, you could greet everyone by using different language. Depending on how formal your event is, you could use terms like distinguished guests, students, colleagues, etc. Outdated phrases that include unnecessarily gendered language like you guys, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, etc., should be removed from your vocabulary as it has the potential and likelihood of leaving people out. One of my favorite less formal ways to start using more inclusive language when addressing groups of people was adopting the phrase y'all. It means all of you all. Some people might not like that word, and that's okay. You could use words like friends or folks if it's a less formal occasion. There are also a lot of phrases in our general collective use that have racist and ableist roots. I'm not going to cover everything that you shouldn't say anymore. I am going to include some of the ones that I know here. One of the most basic ways you can start to remove ableist speech from your vocabulary is to start thinking about the things you say when you say them. Once you start getting used to it, you'll start to notice yourself saying certain words and phrases and wonder, where did that phrase begin? Where does that come from? When this happens for me, I usually then go and Google the etymology of the word or phrase. And when it's something horrifying, I don't say it anymore. It may take you several tries to eliminate a word or phrase from your vocabulary. Don't give up. People appreciate it. So let's break this down a little bit. Some of the anti-Indigenous phrases that are fairly common are as follows. Spirit animal. Non-Indigenous people will sometimes say, oh, that blank is my spirit animal. This is disrespectful to Indigenous people who follow their traditional practices and honor their spirit animals. Powwow. This is something that non-Indigenous people should not use this term to refer to, say, a meeting, for example. Let's have a powwow. The only time you should say powwow is when you're actually talking about a powwow, which is an Indigenous event. Holding down the fort. Often used when someone is being left in charge. This phrase is insensitive at best to Indigenous people who have been and are still being colonized. Have you ever wondered why so many places have port or fort in their names? Circling the wagons or wagon burners are also historical phrases which have stuck around that should no longer be used. Low man on the totem pole is used in reference to levels of authority in office spaces or similar. It's problematic for the disrespect it implies for Indigenous peoples. It's also problematic because totem poles are an inaccurate name for these ceremonial poles. Totem comes from the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe word dodem, meaning our clans, while the poles come from more Western nations, of which I'm less familiar because of where I'm from. And they use these poles for different purposes, some ceremonial in nature. It's just an overall misunderstanding and misnomer. Now, there's a couple of anti-Black phrases I'm going to talk about here. The peanut gallery is used usually like there will be no more comments from the peanut gallery. The peanut gallery derives from the late 1800s vaudeville era, a popular style of entertainment that included jugglers, comedians, singers, and more. The peanut gallery was the cheapest section of seats, usually occupied by people with limited means, for example, Black people. And spooky, while the original Dutch-derived meaning of spook was not anti-Black, after that, it was used to refer to Black people starting around the time of World War II. So we shouldn't say that anymore. I recommend trying to find other fun Halloween words like scary or creepy. And there are many ableist words and phrases in our collective vocabulary. I'm going to talk about a couple of examples here. Lame, when referring to something that is uncool. Some alternatives that you could use are uncool, boring, offensive, or evil. Crazy, insane, unhinged, etc. There are many variations on this one. Examples. Did you see those crazy special effects? Or, today's political climate is crazy. Try to use more descriptive words that accurately describe what you're trying to say. This actually adds more color to your speech anyway. Examples. Did you see those awe-inspiring special effects? Or, today's political climate is intense. Get seated comfortably. Close your eyes if it feels comfortable to do so. Gently bring your attention to your breathing. Notice as you breathe in and out. Notice where each in-breath begins and where it turns and becomes an out-breath. Notice the spaces between breaths. Whenever you begin to feel your mind wandering, that's okay. You can always reconnect by bringing your attention back to your breath. You can bring it back as many times as needed. Just keep coming back to the breath. Take a deep cleansing breath and imagine roots growing from under your feet and your seat. These roots grow deep into the earth. The earth holds you and loves you and provides you with everything you need. You may wish to think thoughts of gratitude for keeping you grounded during your practice and for providing you with everything you need. Take another deep cleansing breath and imagine a tiny silver thread coming out of the top of your head and going up. This thread connects you to your divinity, Creator, God, the universe, whoever or whatever your higher power, and is the source of unconditional love. You may wish to think thoughts of gratitude for keeping you connected to your divinity. Remember that you are a sacred being. Imagine energy coming up through your roots and providing you with all the support you need, and energy coming from above you, pure love, through your silver thread. This energy flows and meets right in your heart center. In your heart center, imagine a light. There is an awareness that is you. When you tune into this space, you'll be able to see, hear, sense guidance from your truest self for your image. Now tune into your emotional self and notice how you're feeling emotionally. There is no wrong feeling. Try not to judge your emotion, just notice it. Now tune into your physical self and notice how you feel in your body in the physical space. Notice where your body is touching the floor and cushion. Notice if you have any tension or sore spots anywhere in your body. Send some extra tender loving kindness to those spots. You may want to use your hands if you can reach these spots. Gently and lovingly hold the place or places that need extra care. Now tune in to your mental self and notice your thoughts. Try not to judge your thoughts, just notice them. Think about your intention for your painting and hold it in your heart. Slowly, begin to bring your awareness back to the room. Take 3 more deep cleansing breaths. Gently begin to wiggle your fingers and toes. Gently make a few small circles with your neck. Now the other way. When you feel ready, open your eyes and come back to the room. The next part is encountering the face. Now, again, as I mentioned, for this step, you want to make sure that your painting is completely dry. Just check that. Yeah, my bear is dry. For this step, again, we're going to be using those hog hair brushes. And for this step, you also want to choose 3 colors. And again, it doesn't matter what color you choose. I think I'm feeling called to some greens here. And I recommend choosing a dark, a medium, and a light color. So I want to use green, and I don't really have enough greens in that color to choose a dark, medium, and light. So I'm going to make some using a little bit of white. Going to use this turquoise color. I think that's probably going to be my medium color. And this Jenkins green will be my dark color. Yeah, I'm going to use the Jenkins green with some white. So I'm going to pour just a tiny amount of this green and some white. I'm going to mix it with a synthetic brush. Until it's the color that I want. That's pretty good. And just so that it's a little bit in the same color scheme, I'm going to go ahead and use this same brush. Mix that in a little bit into my turquoise. That was the medium color. And again, without rinsing this brush, I'm going to do the same thing in the dark color. It's not going to have too much of an effect on that dark color, but it is going to influence it a little bit. There. So now you can see my 3 colors. I've got a dark, a medium, and a light. Now, because I'm working on my bear again, I'm going to use this same smaller, more tapered in hog hair brush. And again, you're going to be able to see that I have not rinsed this brush. I have not dipped it in water. So once you start getting into the areas here, I want you to think about on your being, on the face of your being, we're going to go into certain areas with the dark, certain areas with the light, and then the medium is going to be how we transition those colors out. So I'm going to start with the light, and I'm going to think about the areas that are closest to me when I view this bear. For example, if you were looking at a face, you can see this part of the forehead is closest to you, looking at my face. This part of my nose is closest to you. This part of my chin is closest to you. The parts of my face that are furthest away from you are the outside of my face, outside of my forehead. So when you're thinking about your being, you're going to want to put the light color on those areas that would be closest to you, and the dark color on those areas that are furthest away from you, and then using the medium color to transition between those shades. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the light color. So I'm going to repeat that same technique that we were learning about before, dipping my brush in the paint a little bit and then bringing it to another area on my palette, doing some dry scrubby motions. Now I'm starting to see that that color is looking pretty blue, so the blue on my brush that was there before has really influenced that color. I'm going to go ahead and try to wipe most of that off onto my rag. I want it to influence the color. I don't want it to make it muddy. So I'm going to try that again. Dip my brush in the light green and take it to another section on my palette. Okay, that is a bit better. Now again, to do that dry scrubby technique, you need to wipe off a bit of the excess from your brush. And then coming into the areas that I think are closest to me on this being's face are that part of the forehead. So get in there, a little bit of this light green, and the nose of the bear, that middle part would be closest to me. Get in there with some of that, and probably the cheek, if bears have cheeks. Now, if you were painting a person, let's say, it's very tempting in this moment to go in and do circles right on the cheek like that. That is something you probably want to avoid because it's going to look a little bit funny. Try to get in your circular motions and then just bring the color into the cheek while avoiding doing these big round circles on the cheek if you're painting a person. Yeah, what other areas would be closest to me? I think that there would be a little bit on this ear, maybe on this ear here. So that's pretty good for the little bit on the nose for the bear's face. I'm going to continue this all over the rest of the bear as well, and I think that the bear's leg, this leg, would be pretty close to me here. Maybe a little bit on this leg, but it's definitely further away than this one. And same with these legs, they are a little bit further away, so less of that color. And maybe a little bit here. Listen to your inner voice and see where the painting is calling you. While you've got this color on your brush, ask your painting if there's any other areas that want to have a little bit of that color. One thing that can happen on your painting is if you have a color in only one place, it sometimes might look a little bit funny at the end. So every time I've got a new color on my brush, I want to ask my painting if there's any other areas that would like some of that color. So I think I'm going to add a little bit in here on the ground. You can be a little bit more liberal with the paint on these areas because it's more of a background area. Okay. And that feels pretty good with the light color. Now I'm going to go ahead and, using the dark color, get in some of the areas of the bear that I think are furthest away from me. So again, to load my brush, I'm going to dip it in the paint and then find another area on my palette and do some of these circular motions. Again, I'm finding that it is influencing the color maybe a little bit too much, so I'm going to try and wipe most of that off on my rag. Let's try that again. Some of the dark color, dipping it in there, and then finding another area to do some circular motions. Okay, that's better. It's now looking a little bit more like a dark color. Now, again, I'm going to think about which areas of this bear are furthest away from me. So the outside of the face and probably some parts of the ears. So yeah, let's get in here. Definitely this part of the face is further away, as well as that part of the ear. This part of the ear is a little bit further away. And maybe a little bit just around that other eye, because it's definitely further away from me than this eye. And I think that's good for the face. Now I'm going to do just a little bit there maybe, and then get into the rest of the bear's body. So this part is definitely further away from me. Get in there. Maybe this part. Again, I'm trying not to cover up that glow that we left. This leg is definitely the furthest behind of all of the legs, so I'm adding more to that leg. Same with this other leg, which is in the back. And maybe a little bit here in the bear's belly. And under the bear's chin. And definitely this part of the bear's back is the furthest away, so I need a bit more paint there. There. Okay, so that is the light and the dark. Now let's try and transition those colors a little bit with a medium color. So again, I'm going ahead and trying to remove as much of this dark color as I can on my rag, because the dark color will really influence your next color. Okay, that's pretty good. So again, I'm going to dip my brush in my medium color, and then choosing another area, make some circular motions to embed that paint in my brush. And now I've got this medium color here, and I'm going to try to transition between the light and the dark colors. This just helps to make that transition not quite so harsh. you can listen to your painting and see where it wants you to add that color. Okay, so on a sun, I would say I don't really need to do this step, so I think I'm complete in this step. This is something that you can do again, this step you can do again and again until your painting is in a place that you feel satisfied. So this time I went in with the light first, and then I did dark and then medium as a transition color. If at this point you are not quite satisfied with the image that is showing up on your canvas, you can repeat that step as many times as you want, as I said, but the next time you do it, I recommend starting with the dark color and then the light and then the medium to transition. And if you wanted to do that one more time, again, just alternate which one you start with. If you wanted to do it a third time, start with a light color and then a dark and then your medium color to transition. Now I've still got probably a little bit of paint on my brush. Again, I'm going to just see if there's any other areas in my painting that want a little bit of that color. Go ahead and add that in. This next step is called Awakening the Muse. So the first thing we're going to do is go in with a fine liner brush. Show you what a fine liner brush looks like. So it's a synthetic brush and it's long and thin. And I'm going to choose a color that's pretty different from what I've got on my canvas so far. I'm thinking I'll probably use a white with a little bit of yellow, so it's going to stand out against these darker colors that I've got here on my bear. And let's get that going. A little bit of white. And I'm going to put a little drop of yellow in that color. There we go. So it'll be white with a yellow tinge. And this is a synthetic brush, as I mentioned. This one we're not doing the dry brushing technique for. This is a synthetic brush, so we're going to get smooth lines with this. And we're going to, actually I'm going to add a little bit more white. Oops, that's too much, but that's okay. There, now I've got a very, very light yellow. So with this step, Awakening the Muse, you're going to very intentionally and very mindfully open the senses of your muse. So that means the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears of my bear. If you've got a person that you're painting, that would be your muse. So you're going to get in there on these lines, and you don't need to go from end to end, fully going over each line. You want the line to be somewhat inside the line that already exists. I'm going to have to get up pretty close to do this. Eyes are a little bit small. And think about your own eyes, your own mouth, your own nose and ears while you're doing this step. Not getting any paint coming on there. So that was the eyes. I'm thinking about my own nose, my own sense of smell. And the bear's mouth. And ears. So again, not going over it from end to end on each line, just sort of touching within those lines that already exist there. And now I'm going to, since I've got this color on my brush, I'm going to consider what other areas of the bear might like a little bit more strengthening with this color. So I think maybe the head and the back on this side, maybe the paws, those legs, and maybe the back a little bit on this side. So it just adds a little bit more strength to those lines. So you don't have to do all of the lines, and it just adds a bit more dimension. So I think I'm satisfied there. I'm going to go ahead and put that brush in some water. That was Awakening the Muse.